All right, live on Facebook. Hope you guys are doing well. A little later than we usually start, but Kirby Smart just wrapped up previewing Arkansas this. Talked to Kobe Tyler Stokes. My wife and I are going to have a couple stories coming out of it. Live on Facebook. Yes, we are good to go on Facebook as well. Welcome in. Kirby Smart just wrapped up his final press conference. This week he'll talk to some more reporters tomorrow on a conference call, but this was the sort of last time the UGA media got to access him one-on-one, provided some updates. We'll get to that as to be expected. Didn't say a whole lot about the quarterback situation. Frank DiCarlo, good to see you. Dred Washington, good to see you guys as well. Georgia, game week is here. Georgia plays Arkansas on Saturday, 4 o'clock kickoff on the SEC network. Looking forward to it. We'll sort of touch on this at the end of the night. Didn't think we'd get to this point, but here we are. There's a game. Kirby did update a little bit on COVID, said he's not going to release any sort of information out there about who might be out, who might have it. They've been UGA policy throughout this whole process. I know today Notre Dame had to postpone its game against Wake Forest because of positive tests and quarantine. So it's certainly something to monitor, and it'll be interesting to see come Saturday sort of what the Georgia situation looks like as far as who is out there and who is not. But as of right now, game is still on Saturday, 4 o'clock in Fayetteville, Arkansas. It's going to be a lot of fun. Georgia should win pretty easily. I don't think it'll be all that close. It certainly shouldn't be all that close, just given the talent deficit between these two programs, especially I think you factor in Sam Pittman, as good of an offensive line coach he is. This is his first time sort of running things as the head man, discussing and making the big decisions that a head coach has to make. And I think we saw firsthand with Kirby Smart in 2016 the learning curve that comes with that. So, we'll give another 30 to 45 seconds for people to come in, sort of recap what we just heard from Kirby Smart, talk a little bit about quarterback situation for Saturday, preview Saturday's game a little bit, and then obviously take any comments and questions you have here tonight. Yeah, Fred Howard, it's game week. The SEC football is here, and we'll end with this, but I didn't think we'd get to this point, and I think it's awesome that we've been able to make it here, and I think we're through the hard part. You just have to manage this virus week by week, day by day at this point, but games are on the field in other conferences. Games are going to be on the field in the SEC this weekend, and I think like a lot of you, I'm very grateful and thankful that we've gotten to that point. So, quick hitters for the big news from Kirby's press conference tonight. Trey McKitty officially doubtful for Saturday's game against Arkansas. He had a knee injury in practice a few weeks ago. It's not a surprise that he's doubtful there. The hope is that he's ready to go for the Auburn game, which I think just about everybody agrees here that it is a much bigger and much tougher game, and you'd probably rather have him be healthy and 100% for that game as opposed to maybe rushing him back a little bit early for an Arkansas team that Georgia should be able to beat regardless of who is at quarterback. Smart was asked if he had named a starting quarterback to the team, since he's certainly not going to do it to the media, and as you can expect, he declined to answer that question there. He's still no update on whether or not JT Daniels is going to be officially cleared. We'll probably find out on Saturday. Jermaine Dunbar, I was not cheering for Georgia Tech over the weekend. You have that very backwards. We'll find out on Saturday whether or not JT Daniels is cleared and ready to go. They've remained optimistic that he will be, but I personally still expect Dwan Mathis to be the starter for this Arkansas game. And we'll see how things go from there and where he ultimately and how the quarterback situation shakes out over the course of the game. I do think there's a lot of people really interested in just seeing Dwan succeed and even just get out there, given all that he went through with brain surgery, the year plus it's now taken him to get to this point. And at the very least, regardless of how Dwan plays, it's a very cool story to see a guy overcome serious adversity like that he has to this point. Other news and notes, we touched about it a little bit earlier ago. Kirby's not going to detail a whole lot as far as COVID. They're going to test on Friday, and if you test negative there, you'll get on the plane. You'll go to Arkansas with them. Kirby earlier this week had said that the actual act of traveling is not going to be all that different. It's just going to be getting on the plane. There's the extra step there with the COVID tests and making sure that everyone is negative and not jeopardizing anyone else from there and from that standpoint. One, I think to me anyway, interesting thing about what Kirby had to say tonight, he did seem a little bit miffed that only 2 Georgia defenders were named to the first team All-SEC. Those would be Jordan Davis and Richard LeCount. And from my reading of it, Kirby seems to think that a lot of people, or at least a lot in the national and sort of regional media, might be underrating this Georgia defense a little bit. I know no one sort of in the confines of the Dog Nation universe has done that. There's been certainly a lot of talk from myself, Brandon Adams, Mike Griffith, that this could be the best defense in the country very easily, just with all the talent that they bring back, how well they've recruited. You know, guy we got to talk to, Nakobe Dean, tonight, sky high expectations. He actually was named to the second team, and it wouldn't surprise me in the slightest if either himself or Monty Rice at the end of the season are guys we're talking about as first-team defensive guys. Another guy we talked to, Eric Stokes, tonight, a guy who, if he makes a few more interceptions, because one interesting thing about him and Tyson Campbell and DJ Daniel as well as they've played at that cornerback position, all 3 of them have 0 career interceptions, and that's something Stokes talked about today, and just making more plays on the ball and sort of making that a bigger part of the Georgia defense. I think the most obvious areas of improvement for the Bulldogs there come in forcing sacks and in creating turnovers. And that's something we saw Georgia do a little bit last year, certainly better than the 2018 defense, but there's a lot of room, in my opinion, for growth when it comes to that this year, especially when you also factor in just, again, all the returning talent. Kirby's going to have to find ways to get guys like DJ Daniel, Nolan Smith, Adam Anderson, Azeez Ojulari, Trayvon Walker, guys who are really good players, but not necessarily starters on this defense. He's going to have to find ways to get these guys onto the field, to scheme them up, and to put them in positions to where this defense can make a lot of plays. Because, and especially, I think early on, the defense is going to obviously going to have to carry the offense with all the transition and all the newness on that side of the ball. But if the defense can actually make some of those turnovers, create some of those havoc plays, force other teams to give Georgia better starting field position, I think that's really going to help out this offense and boost sort of what we think this offense could eventually be as they sort of get their feet underneath them. So gambling line I saw that was thrown out there. I believe it's 25-26. I picked Georgia. I don't feel great about it. Personally, I'd much rather bet on the under. I believe the over-under for the game is 51. I don't see Arkansas scoring more than 10 points in this game. So unless you see a really, really big offensive performance from Georgia, which I frankly don't, hold on. Sorry about that. In sort of talking with BA today, I think we're both in agreement here that this Georgia offense is going to take a little time to get together. It's not going to be pretty. Some people are going to be not thrilled with how the offense looks on Saturday, but that was always going to be the case. Georgia's offense could look 95% of what LSU's did a season ago, and people would still not necessarily be happy about that. It is interesting. Kirby was asked about the offense and transitions and changes it might make this year, and he mentioned that LSU offense is sort of an outlier, and I certainly think that's a fair way to put it, just given all the records that they had set a year ago, all the talent that they had on that team, obviously going on to the NFL draft. Georgia, expecting Georgia to be that, I think is really unfair to this team specifically. They might get there. They might look 80, 85% as good as LSU, but to expect Georgia in a just bizarre offseason where they obviously didn't get a chance to work as much as that LSU team did a season ago. I know it's been a popular comparison this offseason with them bringing in Todd Monken, an NFL mind, the talent that they have at quarterback with, at a time, Jamie Newman, JT Daniels, Dwan Mathis, a guy a lot of people seem to like. Bringing all that in, it's going to be a little tougher, I think, for Georgia to get to certainly those highs that the LSU team had. I think if you're a Georgia fan, one thing you're really just looking for is just an improvement, remote competency. The defense last year was clearly good enough to win them big games against Auburn, Texas A&M, Kentucky, games that the other team just really struggled to score. But in my opinion, those games were a lot closer than they necessarily needed to be because of the struggles Georgia had on the offensive side of the ball. I'm not saying Georgia needs to go out and necessarily win those games 55-0, put up 30-plus points in almost every game like LSU did a season ago. But I think there's an in-between there where Georgia can put up enough points and still win comfortably to where like that Auburn game or the Texas A&M game, for example, you're not sweating out what that offense might do, the opposing offense might do against the Georgia defense that's played a lot of stats or a lot of snaps at that point because the offense has sort of left them in a bad position. I think the defense early on this year needs to help out the offense. And if it does that, I think over the course of the season, the offense is going to end up returning that favor and helping out the Georgia defense. So that's sort of recapping the big stuff from Kirby there with what he had said. Moving to the quarterback position next, Mike Griffith and I have talked about this a lot. With the uncertainty regarding JT Daniels' health right now, I don't know how you can say he's going to be the starter for week one. That feels just like a very big guess, especially just given the medical question around his knee. We learned last week that Daniels, who originally had surgery in September following the ACL injury against Fresno State in August of 2019, and actually January, he had ACL surgery, or he sort of had a second surgery to go in there and clean up the procedure. So that's, I think, a big reason why he hasn't necessarily totally been cleared yet. And one of the things because of that is you've seen, that's why I think a big reason why you've seen Juwan Mathis take a lot more snaps in practice, especially with that first team. Because of that, there's a really good chance Juwan's going to be your starter. And while I have not necessarily been high or expecting a whole lot out of him in this first start, it wouldn't stun me if, just given what he's overcome to get to this point, it wouldn't stun me to see him go out there and play really well and make the plays that Georgia needs to. I just got a text message. I'm going to finish with you guys. Mathis, this team has some interesting talent. You know, Jacoby Dean really came out today and praised Zamir White. Said he just feels it feels like to Zamir, he's a lot more comfortable running the football, just feels like a better football player than he was a season ago. You have a guy like George Pickens, who Eric Stokes, I think, spoke very highly of tonight as well. We'll have probably a story on that tomorrow. With Stokes, with Pickens another year older, another year mature, another year better, he said last Friday talking to him that he feels bigger and faster than he was a season ago, which is pretty scary given how big and fast he was for Georgia last year. So there's some interesting weapons on this Georgia team. One interesting thing you won't, I don't think, really be able to learn a whole lot against Arkansas, but going forward is how does this offensive line hold up? They lost a ton from last year. They lose 2 first-round picks. They lose a guy in Solomon Kinley who's a week 1 starter for the Dolphins. You lose Cade Mays, who started 18 games for you. And actually, one quick thing on Mays here, Kirby Smart was asked about Mays and the sort of latest with his situation. And really, he was asked by Dog Nation's Mike Griffith to comment regarding from Mays' lawyer that Georgia was a toxic environment. And Kirby said he could not comment on that. So just one little nugget there on Mays. This offensive line is something I'm really interested in watching going forward. Lauren Harlow asked, so if JT was named the starter, would you be all over him in a more positive way? I'd probably if JT was clearly healthy, I do think my expectations would be a little bit higher for this offense, just given Juwan Mathis has never thrown a pass in a collegiate game. JT Daniels has. He started 12 games at a big-time program like USC. He's sort of been through the ups and downs of a college season. He played against a number 3 ranked Notre Dame team in 2018 and played pretty well in that game. Obviously, USC didn't win, and they did struggle that year. But I don't necessarily know if all that can necessarily be put on the shoulders of Daniels. And one of my big things – and, again, even if Daniels was the guy, I wouldn't be proclaiming that Georgia's offense was going to be great. We saw last year you just can no longer accept this from Kirby Smart that the offense is just going to be great and taken care of because of whoever the offensive coordinator is. Because last offseason, we were saying a lot of really good things about James Coley, and over the course of the year, that ended up not being the case. And this offense really struggled under his direction. Whether necessarily it's all on him, I don't know. But the idea that you're just going to blindly praise someone going into a season when you haven't seen them do anything, I think it's a risky, and it sets people up for bad expectations, and I prefer not to do that. So Nick Talon asks, okay, Lauren, well, I can't argue with you. Nick Talon asks, will we learn a lot about what to expect from our season this Saturday? I personally don't, because I just think Georgia is significantly better than Arkansas. Arkansas is going to be one of the worst teams in the SEC this season. It's a complete rebuild there for Sam Pittman. 2-3 years from now, I'll be interested to see where he has that program. But Georgia has such a wide talent gap that I just don't see a way that Arkansas is really able to keep this close. So I would expect to learn a lot more from this Georgia team next week against Auburn and even the week after that. I'm not arguing with you guys about JT Daniels or Dwan Mathis. Whatever. Fred Howard brings up Malik Herring being overlooked. It's interesting. For all the talk we've had about Malik Herring Trayvon Walker, for all the talk we've had about him and the expectations for him, I still expect Malik Herring to start on Saturday, to play a big role in this Georgia defense, to be a guy that, especially on rundowns, plays a big role. So as much overlooked as a fair word, he was also named second-team All-SEC, I believe, by the coaches. So because of Trayvon Walker's, I think, recruiting profile and the flashes we saw from him last year, especially as a pass rusher, I think that's something where Herring is still a very good player, and it just goes to sort of show you the overall impressive depth that comes with this Georgia defense and what they're going to be able to do this season. If a guy like Malik Herring is getting quote-unquote overlooked, that just says a lot about how much talent is on this team and how I think this Georgia defense is good enough to win games. So, a guy like that out there, the fact that Malik Herring, I don't even know if his name has been brought up in a press conference setting quite yet. The fact that we haven't talked about him in that manner just shows how deep and talented this Georgia defense is when it has guys like Jordan Davis, Nakobe Dean, Monty Rice. I could go on and on about all those guys out there. So I think this Georgia defense is going to do a lot. So Chad Buchanan, I don't necessarily know if Jared Zirkle is going to be the place kicker. Jack, I'm going to butcher his name here, Podolesny from St. Simon's, is a guy who's done pretty well there in that competition, and it wouldn't surprise me if we go out there and see him kick. He's a walk-on from Glenn Academy down there in the Brunswick area. I don't think it is a slam dunk that he goes out there, that Zirkle is going to be the kicker, the place kicker anyway, we see out there. I do think that Jake Camarda is still going to be your punter there. And he was a guy who was, to my surprise, named second-team All-SEC, but he's someone who over the course of last year, I think, really got a lot better, especially after that Notre Dame game. So I think with the special teams this year, it'll be interesting. Obviously, not having a guy like Rodrigo Blankenship, I think that might help the Georgia offense in forcing Kirby Smart and Tom Monken to be a little bit more aggressive instead of just leaning back on a guy like Blankenship, who was pretty automatic for the most part throughout his college career. And this weekend, you saw him go 4 for 4 on field goals with the Indianapolis Colts. So to have that out, to not have a luxury like that in Blankenship, I think that might force this offense to go for it a little bit more, to be a little bit more aggressive in those 50 to 30-yard ranges. And, of course, they could always just decide, hey, let's just punt it and play defense. So that's one of the things where you might see a situation like that on Saturday where Georgia does get in that 35 to 45-yard range. It's 4th and 2, 4th and 3. Do they choose to be aggressive and go for it? Do they choose to punt and just play to their defensive strength? Do they trot a kicker out there to sort of see where things go from there? So because of that, I do think while you're not going to learn a ton about necessarily specifically this Georgia offense, I think maybe the mindset and what you want to see from them, especially when it comes to those special situations, which is just a poorly worded phrase on my part, to have that out there, I do think there are some little interesting nuggets and tidbits you can learn, but as far as a big picture thing, I just don't necessarily know that. Chris McLennan asks, who do you think will be the number 2 receiver when it's all said and done behind Pickens? By the end of the season, I think that guy's going to be Jermaine Burton. From my understanding of it, he might be a guy who makes an impact game one. How much of that or what that looks like, I don't know. Last year, George Pickens, for example, in his first game, his Power 5 opponents, he had 3 total catches. While he did have a great freshman season, it also took him some time to sort of get adjusted to what those opposing defenses look like. And with Georgia's first 4 games, really, Arkansas is what Arkansas is, but Auburn, Tennessee, and Alabama all have a lot of talent. Tennessee and Alabama in those secondaries. So it might take some time for Burton to become that guy. But I think over the course of the season, he's going to be a guy that I think really emerges on this Georgia offense. To start the year, I think you'd maybe see a little bit more out of Jackson than I think a lot of people thought. I think he certainly benefits from the Dominic Blaylock injury, where he unfortunately retore his ACL. But he's a guy that has a lot of trust from Kirby Smart, has a lot of trust from this coaching staff. He might not wow you in the way that Pickens does as a receiver, but he's going to do the little things right. He's going to block for you downfield. He's going to be a physical wide receiver. And it'll be interesting to see how open sort of this Georgia offense is and where they go from there. And Jackson's a guy early on who, because of the inexperience with Burton, I think is a guy that you could see a little bit more out of than a lot of people expected. And he started last year against Vanderbilt, had a big catch in that game, and then unfortunately broke his hand in that game. And because of that, he had to miss some time, and I think it really set back the rest of his season. But early on, I think Kearis Jackson, look for him to be your number 2 receiver. And then over the course of the year, I would probably say Jermaine Burton is going to emerge as that number 2 guy besides Pickens. Pete Weeshaw, if Mathis plays lights out against Arkansas, would you say he starts against Auburn hands down? I think that certainly is something to be considered. And if Mathis does go out and play extremely well and looks like a guy that a lot of people think he could look like, that certainly has to change the calculus on this, because while Daniels, there's the expectation that he might be cleared, it's still also going to take him some time to really get comfortable in that knee and sort of gain the confidence that you need to operate this Georgia offense from it. So even if Daniels is cleared for that game, and even if he does start, I would still probably expect to see Mathis take some snaps in that Auburn game, regardless of how he plays against Arkansas this first week. And I know there's a lot of excitement around Mathis and what it'll look like. And he's going to do some really nice things. The question that comes with him is, can he avoid those first-time player mistakes? Can he protect the football? If he can do that, I think that's going to open up a lot of doors for him in this offense and ultimately help him out a whole lot, especially in potentially gaining traction and winning that starting job over the course of the season. Let's see. Scrolling for questions. Nick Talon asks, does this continue to be the no-name defense, or does someone emerge to be recognized nationally? That's a tough question, because I certainly think Richard LeCounte is a guy everyone knows, but he might not, sort of like J.R. Reed last year, he might not necessarily be a guy that everyone raves about. I think if there's a spot where I could probably, if you wanted to guess, I would say potentially one of those outside linebackers, whether it be Azeez Ojulari making sort of a jump from last year where he had 5.5 sacks to, can he get to 8, 9 in a shortened 10-game SEC-only slate? A guy like Nolan Smith, who has that recruiting pedigree built in. A guy like Trayvon Walker. Potentially a guy like Jordan Davis. I think if Jordan Davis can get sort of the sacks and pass rushing numbers up, and that's something we saw from him over the course of last year, if he's able to do that, I think that's going to really probably be, other than LeCounte, your bet for a guy that everyone in the national media knows. You look at a guy like Alabama a few years ago, a guy like Quinn Williams, was great, was always great against the run, but when he emerged as a pass rusher, that's when really everyone took notice. And ultimately, with the way the sport is covered and really just the general interest, no one's ever raving about great rush defense or guys who are continuously stopping that aspect of the football. So if Davis emerges as a pass rusher, if it's Malik Herring, Trayvon Walker, if it's one of those guys emerging as a pass rusher, I think that's an area. And even going back to Roquan Smith, I think the last guy to really capture the national attention as a Georgia defender, he had, I believe, 5.5 or 6.5 sacks that year. He was a guy who created negative plays in the backfield. And ultimately, if you want to get recognized on a national level, I think that's how you have to go about doing it. Let's see. Yeah, Lauren Harlow brings up James Cook. I think he's a guy that, from all indications, has had a fantastic offseason and is a guy who seems to really be benefiting from the James Coley offense to the Todd Monken offense. And he's a guy, well, we're all, I think, looking forward to seeing what Zamir White does and how he plays on Saturday. I'll be really interested to see the role in which Cook is used, how he's used as a pass catcher. Monken last year, he had Nick Chubb and Kareem Hunt for half the season there in Cleveland. And if you watch the Browns game this past week, how they used White, how the Browns last week, I think, used Chubb and Kareem Hunt. I think that's a way that Georgia can sort of look and learn from, using Zamir White and James Cook Chubb sort of used in the obvious rushing down situations and sort of the closer, tighter games. Whereas I think with Kareem Hunt, he's more of the passing down back, a guy where if the ball is going to be spread out or the formation is going to be spread out, he's a guy that's going to be in there. In hurry-up situations, you might see a guy like James Cook in there. And if, last week against the Bengals, now granted the Bengals are terrible, Cleveland had a lot of success with those two running backs, and it, I think, showed a possible blueprint for what you could see with White and Cook this year, where Chubb sort of the workhorse, White sort of the workhorse, 20-plus carries, and Cook and Hunt were the guys maybe making some of those more explosive long field plays and rattling off big touchdowns. I think that's a really interesting way that Cook and White can be used comparatively to guys like Chubb and Hunt, who had a lot of success at the NFL level. Let's see. Questions, comments. We've got about 5 more minutes. Byron Welker asking about, I'm assuming Jermaine means Jermaine Burton, a guy who, of the freshman wide receivers, I wrote about him on Monday morning. He's a guy who's really stepped up and emerged here early on in practice. I don't know if he'll start on Saturday, but he'll play very early in that game. Look for Georgia to potentially try and get him involved to see what they have in him. Blaylock last year is a guy who early on in the season pretty clearly earned Jake Fromm's trust in making some big catches in some third down situations. I'll be interested to see if Burton can sort of do the same thing with a guy like Mathis this coming Saturday against Arkansas in a game that, similarly to how Georgia and Vanderbilt played out last year, I think you might see something similar with Georgia and Arkansas, where Georgia just wants to run the ball a whole lot, get up big early, sort of sit on Arkansas for the course of 4 quarters and get out of there with, maybe not the prettiest or the greatest win ever, but a comfortable win and starting the season out on the right foot. So, Ben Edgman, I personally do not get to watch the practices and scrimmages live. I think it's been a little bit different this year compared to some past years, but we do have some sources or sauces, as people like to say, to watch out there. Let's see. Questions, comments. We'll probably go another good 5 minutes here. Gary Moore brings up Marcus Rosemy. He's added to his last name Marcus Rosemy-Jacksaint. He's a guy, Burton is pretty clearly number one. Rosemy-Jacksaint is a guy who I'll be interested to see over the course of the season. Can he steal some reps? Can he earn some more roles? Because all indications are he's a guy who's got great hands, potentially the best on the team, which is really saying something. And he's already sort of physically ready in terms of his body type. Obviously, he's not quite as built as either George Pickens or Justin Robinson are. But he is a guy who does the little things really well. And I think that's sort of an interesting thing for me to watch going forward and how involved he gets in the offense. Because I think with him, if you see Rosemy-Jacksaint taking on a bigger role, that means Georgia's going more 4 wide receiver looks. They're spreading things out. They're splitting things out a little bit more of an open offense. And that's sort of where I would see Rosemy-Jacksaint's role being and sort of going from there. Yeah, Jeremy Chapman, I think you hit the nail on the head. Early for this Arkansas game, most definitely, you're going to still see a very run-heavy look, for my opinion. I think they're going to want to run the ball. I think they're going to want to establish Zamir White, James Cook as well, along with George Pickens, who's, I think, obviously the most talented player on Georgia's offense. White and Cook are probably the second and third best offensive options or for skill perspective, so you want to sort of get the ball in hands as much. And with this being Dwan Mathis's first career game, I think you're going to want to establish some confidence with him, get out to an early lead, sort of loosen things up with him a little bit, and establishing a strong running game, I think is going to do wonders for Mathis and his confidence out there and how he might eventually play. Let's see. Davis Painter asks who is going to return kicks and punts. Kirby Jackson did this a little bit last year. I think you could also potentially see a guy like James Cook or Demetrius Robertson back there as well. I know when Dominic Blaylock was healthy, he was the guy back there returning punts anyway for Georgia. But look for a guy like Kirby Jackson to potentially do it. I think James Cook is another name to keep an eye on there as well, sort of just given the talent that he has. Arian Smith long-term might be a guy there, but he's still working his way back to being fully cleared from his meniscus surgery that I had this offseason. And sort of like Rosemy-Jacksaint takes a bigger role in the offense over the course of the year. once Smith gets healthy from that knee injury, I think you might see him take a bigger role in the punt and kick returning game. Chris Singletary asks, what's the score this weekend? He gives me 42-7. That would hit the under, and that would allow Georgia to cover. I will say, I won't go 42. I will say 35-3. I think this Georgia offense, they're going to do enough to win. It may not look pretty. They may not throw for 300 yards. It might not necessarily be what everyone wants to see after all this months of build-up and hype. But I think Dwan Mathis is going to be able to do enough to make a few nice plays, make a few big plays, not 10, 15, but a few nice plays in the passing game with George Pickens. I think you're going to see a healthy dose of Zamir White and James Cook. And then defensively, while, yes, Arkansas does have an intriguing offensive coordinator in Kendall Briles, a good quarterback in Felipe Franks, this Georgia defense is just too good. I don't see a way Arkansas scores a whole lot of points on Saturday. So give me the Georgia defense to make things really difficult for Arkansas. And most importantly, I think set up this Georgia offense for an opportunity to have some easy points here. Let's see. Robbie McCullough, is Dwan definitely starting? Kirby Smart will never come out and say that. I wouldn't be surprised if on Saturday when the PA announcers come out and say the starters, it'll be Dwan Mathis or JT Daniels. But our expectation here is that Dwan is going to be the guy on Saturday. Even at this point, if JT Daniels is cleared, I still think you're going to see Mathis get a lot of reps with the ones just because that's the way practice has been going these past couple of weeks because of the uncertainty around JT Daniels and his knee. Let's see. Let's get one more good comment or question. And then I've got one little spiel before heading out. Do we think we see Beck in mop-up duty? I do think we see Beck at some point in this game. I think if Georgia does get up by a couple big points, big possessions, I wouldn't be surprised to sort of see Beck out there, get some more reps, get some live college looks, even if it is against second and third stringers. I do think there's some value in that. I'm working on filling out the 70-man roster right now for the travel roster, and I do think that there's a good chance Beck is on the bus, especially when this is a game where he could really get some reps because of the talent gap between Arkansas and Georgia. So because of that, I do think we see a little bit of Carson Beck. How much? I don't know. That's going to ultimately depend, I think, on how well Dwan Mathis plays. If he plays great, that also, I think, means we see a little bit more of Beck. If it does take him a little bit while to get going, maybe we don't see Beck until late in the quarter. So that's your Carson Beck update. Joel Moody going, if you have predictions, throw them out there. Joel Moody has the count getting a pick 6. Don Williams has 150 yards from Zamir White and 2 touchdowns. He also has Dwan Mathis throwing for 3 touchdowns. I think if you get that from Mathis and from Zamir White, it's going to make a lot of people really happy. Keith Finney, this will be the last one, asking about uniforms. They have confirmed that they are going to wear the red pant, white jersey with the stripes on the side logo for Arkansas. It's a way to sort of honor the 1980 team. This will be the only time all season that they wear those uniforms, which I think is kind of a bummer. Because I think the red pant, white jersey ones look great. Personally, I like those better than the black uniforms with the weird dog collar on top. But those will be the uniforms they wear on Saturday, which, yes, Saturday, it is Georgia's first game of the season. It is a game that there were certainly times, April, May, June, and certainly in August when the Big Ten and the Pac-12 announced that they were canceling their season. I did not think we would get to. And I never weighed into the should they. I just always thought that the powers that be would just decide, hey, we can't do this. Let's close down the season. But credit to the SEC, credit to Greg Sankey, credit to these coaching staffs for pushing through, for getting a season on track. And while there are still certainly, I believe, going to be some bumps in the road throughout the season, I think for the most part, you're going to see most teams be able to get through this and operate through this. I think Georgia's going to be one of those teams, and it'll be interesting to watch and monitor how things go with Notre Dame. But having said all that, I do think that is a good thing that you're playing college football this Saturday. And I'm very excited, like I'm sure much of you all are, that Georgia is going to get on the field, even if it is a shortened season. 10 SEC games, I think, is a fantastic proposition. Personally, if it goes well, I'd like to see it more going forward. And the fact that we got to this point, I'm thrilled for it. I'm excited that we actually have Georgia football to talk about this fall. And we've talked about a lot of nonsense this offseason, but going forward, we're going to have actual football to talk about every Tuesday night here, every Monday night with Mike Griffith, every Wednesday night with Jeff Sintel, Thursday on Cover 4, and then obviously with Brandon Adams and Dog Nation Daily every Monday through Friday. The long off season, the long winter, whatever phrase, dystopian phrase you want to use to describe it, we have gotten through it. And this time next Tuesday, we'll be recapping the Arkansas game. We'll be previewing the Auburn game. We'll be talking about what Kirby Smart said. I can almost assure you we'll still be talking about the quarterback situation. But I'm thrilled that we got to this point, especially when there were times this season where I didn't think we'd get there. So have a great Tuesday night, everyone. Reminder, Jeff Sintel tomorrow night before the hedges at 8 o'clock. Thursday night, Cover 4 at 7:30. Friday, you've got Friday Night Mike, him sort of previewing the game, last chance before the game goes off. And Mondays, you get him again. And then every Monday through Friday, you've got Dog Nation Daily with Brandon Adams. So thanks you guys for tuning in. Hope you have a great weekend. Go Dogs. And we'll see you next Tuesday.